I apologize in advance for the quality of this video. I don't know if you can tell my voice is kind of shaky at the moment, and my heart is pounding in my chest right now as I've been going through reading a lot of the tweets from the Why I Didn't Report hashtag, talking about why various women, mostly some men as well, didn't come forward to report their particular instances of rape or other sexual abuse. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to make this particular video or not, mostly because, it's still very recent and tensions are really high at the moment. People's emotions are raging at the moment, a lot of anger, a lot of crying. So I don't want to come off as insensitive to what these women are going through. Obviously, rape is probably one of the most vile, inhumane things that anybody could do to another person, second only to, I would say, murder or torture. I've written a little bit about rape in my blog before for anybody who might not understand. The sex part isn't the worst of it. Sex is just a physical, biological motion. It's more so the psychological impact that's so traumatic, and the fact that, particularly with women or children, you're dealing with a situation where somebody is a lot stronger and more easily able to influence the situation to their favor, and so they overpower you. And you read a lot of these reports, women saying, they were pinned down, or had weapons held to them, or the person was somebody that otherwise had some form of power over them, be it a family member or, at least a couple of cases I read, it was a police officer. But the worst part of rape, I would argue, is the feeling of powerlessness. The idea that you were in a situation where you felt so completely helpless, and you didn't want whatever the outcome was, but you didn't have the ability to affect it or change it, or in a lot of these cases to escape it. And so you just kind of gave in to the darkness. And a lot of these women, apparently throughout most of their lives, they never were able to speak out, or they were unwilling to speak out, and so that same sense of powerlessness stayed with them, and they relive it over and over. Having said that, I want to talk about this particular tweet here by the Ultraviolet Action Group. It says, "The fact that so many people identify with Why I Didn't Report proves that we have a massive rape culture problem in this country. Survivors deserve better." Now, again, survivors do deserve better, and rape is horrible. But I want to talk about some of the things that we can do to improve this situation. It says what rape culture means. So, obviously, within the culture war at the moment, you have two different sides, and each side has their own definition of what rape culture means. So feminists will probably give more or less what this definition here is, and then people who are anti-feminist, anti-SJW will look at this and say, in the United States or the West, parts of Europe, for instance, even as bad as this is, at least we don't have, systemic female genital mutilation. We don't have courts where the punishment for a woman who comes forward is to be further raped. Various parts of the Islamic world, parts of Africa, Central America, for instance. So you have two groups that are essentially dealing with two different visions of what rape culture means. They're drawing the box around the topic in two different ways. So within this context, though, it says 1 out of 5 American women has survived an attempted or completed rape. but survivors are doubted, shamed, and harassed. Again, it sounds cliche at this point, but, even if one person is raped, that's completely horrible, and we should denounce it as the obvious evil that it is. The first one here, it says, rape cases are not being reported. Only a third of all rapes are actually reported. Now, if you go through each of these, okay, all of these, each of these by themselves is pretty bad. All of them in totality is very bad. However, this one right here is the one thing that you, as a victim, can do something about. You may not be able to deal with any of these other situations, but as difficult as it would be, I would encourage any woman who has been through that, or who may one day go through that, God willing otherwise, that if you are raped or sexually assaulted, as hard as it may be, you dig down, you find your strength, you find your voice, and you report it. Okay? Even if you aren't believed, even if the system fails you, even if the even if the person gets away, this is something that you can do something about. You can't do anything else about any of these other things. Right? You can't do anything about whatever the system and what other people do. You can raise awareness of it, as this post does. But unless you come forward, none of this other stuff can happen. Okay? So it says only a third of all rapes are actually reported. So right off the bat, before any of this other stuff, 2/3 of rapists are getting away. And that's because you didn't come forward. Again, I understand that rape is horrible, that you didn't deserve this, that you want justice and that the system often fails you, that it's hard, that most of the time these women don't come forward for it's for a number of reasons, but generally it's one of two reasons. Either the situation was such that they didn't know that they were raped, or they didn't think that they were raped, so as cold as it may be to say that, effectively they weren't a victim. Because in order to be a victim, you have to find fault with whatever action was done to you. And if you don't even consider it rape yourself, then nobody can sue on behalf of another. You're the only one that can decide whether what happened to you was criminal and unwanted and against your consent. So if you're not the one coming forward, nobody else can come forward on your behalf. That's number one. Number two, a lot of these women don't come forward because they feel that they're not going to be believed. And then a lot of this other stuff goes into why many of them feel like they won't be believed. But again, the hardest part about rape is the feeling of powerlessness. So if you want to gain your power back, you have to come forward. You have to report it. None of this other stuff can happen. Okay? You can't even begin to get your power back if you don't come forward. So start with that. Okay? If 100%, it says only a third of all rapes are actually reported. If 100% of rapes were reported, then we can talk about this other stuff. Okay? When people talk about blaming the victim, okay, this is what they're talking about. Again, I know it's hard, but let the system fail if it's going to fail. Don't let it fail because you were the one that caused it to fail. Okay? The only way that, as I said, that you can get your power back and to feel in control and to find healing and get past this trauma is to take your power back. And that begins by finding the strength to report it. Okay? So, having said that, let's move on to the next part. If a survivor does report, police might not investigate. Hundreds of thousands of rape kits are sitting untested across the U.S. Now, again, as with all of these steps, this is completely abhorrent. Now, why are hundreds of thousands of rape kits sitting untested across the US? Is it because the United States is the most horribly misogynistic culture in the entire world? No. I would argue, and I say this as someone who's studied law, that a large part of why these rape kits are going untested has to do with lack of resources and manpower to go and actually process these kits. Why are these kits going untested? Why do we not have the resources needed for this? Well, maybe part of the reason why we don't have enough resources to go around testing these kits is because we're going around testing bullshit drug tests for a bullshit war on drugs, putting people in jail for having the wrong plant on their person. You know, we have all these tests that have to be conducted for various government and corporate institutions where they have drug tests that need to be done. And that's eating up a lot of this time. You have police that are going around arresting people, staking them out for marijuana offenses and for other crap like that. Right? Meanwhile, you have hundreds of thousands of rape kits that need to be tested. That suggests a hugely screwed up sense of priorities. Okay, I would rather that the worst drug offenders go free than to let hundreds of thousands of rapists get away because we didn't prioritize our values correctly. Okay, so a lot of this can go away if people report and if we get our priorities realigned. Okay, another reason police might not investigate it is, and a reason why prosecutors often refuse to take up cases that police do recommend, is because there's not sufficient evidence in the case to prosecute and convict the alleged rapist. Obviously, this is complicated. Okay. If you go through and you read some of these reports of why they didn't report, you'll see some cases like, oh, well, I went and took a shower just to wash off the feeling of being dirty and being raped. And as a society, as human beings, you know, we can certainly empathize with that feeling. Okay. Unfortunately, there are consequences for doing that. I'm not going to tell anyone how they should have dealt with the particular incident in the immediate aftermath. I'm just letting you know that factually, objectively, there are consequences to that. It sucks. You know, I wish it were otherwise. But at the end of the day, you know, wishing things were better isn't going to magically change whether you're able to put a rapist in jail. Okay, so part of the reason why it says fewer than 4 in 10 cases are ever prosecuted. Now, it certainly doesn't help in terms of gathering evidence to put somebody away that hundreds of thousands of rape kits are sitting untested across the US. If these rape kits were tested, number one, we would figure out more or less what the actual rape rate is. And number two, we would have evidence sufficient to prosecute these cases instead of waiting 10, 20, 30 years down the line to have it all come down to a he said, she said. Now, I would love to live in a world where, you know, we could just take everybody at their word. We used to live in such a society where people's word actually meant something and people stood by that and made their word their bond. But we don't live in that world anymore. And it seems ever more unlikely that we're going to live in that world. Another reason why we can't simply rely on a person's testimony. Okay, so within feminist circles, there's a lot of emphasis put on, you know, we should believe women. However, as someone who's studied law, I can tell you that witness testimony is among the least reliable forms of evidence. Now, setting aside whether or not the person may be lying, even assuming that in 100% of these cases, these women actually believed what they were saying, that still isn't sufficient. And the reason for that is because people have false memories. They don't remember details accurately, even in the immediate aftermath. You can go online and you can see all of these psychology tests and experiments that are done where, the person will be asked to focus on a particular scene that's playing out, or they'll be asked to remember details of a particular question or a set of statements made constructing a scenario, and then even just a few moments later, the examiner will go and they'll ask a set of questions and the person will completely fail the test. And this is in a situation where, you're calm, you're relaxed, you know that you're going to be tested in advance, you're not under any kind of emotional stress, and yet people still fail. They still have false memories, they still get the details wrong, they completely miss certain details, and all of this together is why witness testimony is among the least reliable forms of evidence. This is why when you hear people that have actually studied law talk about the situation, they'll often say, it's not enough that you come forward with your testimony. A lot of these women, like we were seeing with the Dr. Ford case, are unwilling to even go under oath, to answer questions, to follow the procedures of due process where a person has the right to face their accuser. Setting aside all of that stuff, witness testimony is not reliable, even in the best of situations. This is why it's important to have additional evidence, which, again, if we weren't busy prosecuting people for drugs, we could go and process these rape kits. If people would come forward and submit to doing these tests, we would have more evidence available. You can see how this is starting to compound and get pretty bleak, honestly. If a rape case does go to trial, survivors are often re-traumatized by the process. Defense attorneys often blame and shame survivors on the stand. Now, this is going to sound cold, I know, but can anyone honestly tell me, how would you go about processing a rape trial without the survivor having to relive the experience? Just think about that for a second. Okay? Right? A third of women are coming forward, which means 2/3 of them can't even talk about the situation. Okay? And we're supposed to put them on the stand and ask them detailed questions about a horrifically nightmarish experience, and we're expected to believe that they're not going to be re-traumatized by the experience. Props to those women that are brave enough to come forward and who are able to go through the entire thing. Again, I know that it's difficult, but if you want justice, this is what you have to do. Okay? You can't control what the defense attorney is going to do. You can only control what you're going to do in that situation. And if you want justice, even setting aside whether you want justice, if you just want your life back, you need to be able to confront this and realize that the world is a dark and dangerous place, and that it requires you to be strong in will. Defense attorneys often blame and shame survivors on the stand. Well, again, that's essentially their job. Would you want to be the person who's accused of rape and not have your attorney go and use every tool in their arsenal? What would you like the defense attorney to do in this situation? Would you rather they just believe the woman unquestioningly, roll over and just anything that they say is fine? We're going to do away with the presumption of innocence, and we're going to operate on a presumption of guilt here. That to be accused is to be convicted until you can prove your innocence otherwise. Is that the kind of world that you would rather live in? Again, I know that sounds harsh, But this is the reality of it. You know, what kind of world do you want to live in? It sucks. I understand that. But you can only do what you can do. Now, the reason why defense attorneys blame and shame survivors is because sometimes women do lie. You know, I know you hate hearing that, but women are not perfect angels. There are plenty of women who are absolute bitches, who are vindictive. Some of them are man-haters. 6% or less of charges may be false, but that's still 6% of cases. If we're talking about the United States, where you have 300 million people, roughly, okay, 6% is about, what is that, 18,000? 18,000 vindictive, spiteful, man-hating women who are going to go and lie about a man and ruin his reputation. Obviously, 1 out of 5 American women has survived an attempted or completed rape. So obviously, that's a lot more. That's 20%. That's more than 3 times the number of false accusations that we're talking about here. But this is one of the main reasons why this situation is complicated. And every time a woman comes and falsely accuses a man of rape or sexual assault, it puts a chilling effect on those women that are actually victims and makes it less likely that they're going to come forward in the future. Okay, so this is something else that women can do, is they can stop lying about rape. If 100% of women told the truth about rape, this wouldn't even be a factor. Okay, and then absolutely we could say, yes, believe women. But human beings don't work that way. That's not the reality that we live in. Okay? Do I think that all these women should have to suffer because of the actions of a few? No, obviously, I think that's horrible. I think it's unjust. I think these women do deserve better. But the question is, what do we do about it? This is something that we can do something about. It's not a partisan issue, although people like to make it one. There was a tweet the other day. Some woman, I forget her name, she was essentially saying she didn't care whether, you know, a man's life, his career was destroyed because a woman falsely accused him. Now, I had responded to that essentially saying, you know, this is not an either or. You know, just because some women lie and some men are rapists doesn't mean that we have to necessarily pick a side based on gender lines. We can say that evil is evil regardless of which gender it impacts. You know, rape is wrong, lying about rape is wrong. You have people like Sean Penn, who, regardless of whether or not he actually was guilty of raping anybody, you know, he was still absolutely correct when he said that the Me Too movement is dividing men and women. Because what the Me Too movement essentially is doing, apart from giving some women their voices, it's also creating a chill effect for men as well. And that was his whole point, is saying, and this was Henry Cavill's whole point, and a lot of these people that are coming forward are saying, you know what, I'm not going to be involved with a woman if it means that there's the potential for me to be falsely accused of rape. Now, it may be 6% or less chance, but that's still not zero now, is it? Okay, imagine if women said, you know, 1 out of 5 of us is raped, so I'm not going to have anything to do with a man ever again. You know, people would hold that up as one of two things. Either they would say, you know, that's very brave of you for taking a stand, and I have complete sympathy for you, and I totally understand why you would do that. Or they would say, no, that's horrible. You're completely demonizing all men for the actions of a few. We can be nuanced about this. We can say that there are good men, there are bad men, there are good women, there are bad women. That men don't deserve to be lied about and women don't deserve to be raped. Again, it's not an either or. We can say that evil is evil regardless of who it affects. And it does affect all of us, you know. If a woman lies about rape, you know, even if you don't care about what happens to the man, you should care about the fact that it prevents other women from coming forward because it makes them less likely to be believed. You know, this is why up to 50% of rape reports, this is why students think up to 50% of rape reports are fabricated. And even if a rapist is convicted, he can receive an extraordinary light sentence. Only 3% of rapists spend even a day in jail. Now, again, a lot of this is dependent on what the victim wants, but some of it is also dependent on the system as well. So if a woman, for instance, decides that she wants to press for the man to go in jail and the system fails her, okay, then that you can obviously blame on the system. But contrary to what this would imply, not all women want that. You know, some women just want to be done with it. Some women, depending on the case, you know, they'll suffice to have, say, a restraining order or something along those lines. This shit is just really frustrating, and it frustrates me as somebody who has spent time studying the law that people don't understand how these things work, and so a lot of it is made out to be worse than it really is. Again, I don't want to minimize the fact that, you know, there's plenty of rape in the United States and the West, and that even one of them is horrible. I don't want to undermine that. I don't want to sound like I'm dictating to people how they should feel about this, but, you know, if anything, this proves that the situation is complicated. And to sit there and say, you know, there's only one particular solution to this, and that it's to believe women unquestioningly, uncritically, and that it's all men's fault, and it's all the misogynistic, sexist patriarchy's fault, I think is disingenuous. So, you know, that was rough to get through, but I think a lot of that needed to be said. I know not everybody's going to take that particularly well. Some people will be angry and upset by what I said. You know, if you are somebody who is a victim of rape and you take offense to what I said, I don't blame you for that. Again, I'm not going to tell you how you should feel. I do think that you should come forward. I do have sympathy for you if the system fails you, but you can only do what you can do. And in this case, coming forward is something that you can do. Telling the truth is something that you can do. Right? And hopefully, if people come forward and tell the truth, and if we steer our justice system away from bullshit low priorities and make this higher priority, then we'll be able to overturn a lot of this systemic rape culture. All right, that's all for now.
Of course, the question hanging over all of this will be about credibility and believability. Randy Kay spoke with a group of Republican women in Florida.
A show of hands, how many of you believe Judge Kavanaugh when he says this didn't happen?
I believe him.
Believe him too.
I do believe him. I believe him.
How can we believe the word of a woman of something that happened 36 years ago when this guy has an impeccable reputation? There was nobody that has spoken ill will about him. Everyone that speaks about him, this guy's an altar boy. a scout. He's, because one woman made an allegation. Sorry, I don't buy it.
But in the grand scheme of things, my goodness, there was no intercourse. There was maybe a touch.
Right.
Can we really? 36 years later, she's still stuck on that? Had it happened?
I mean, we're talking about a 15-year-old girl, which I respect. I'm a woman, I respect. And we're talking about a 17-year-old boy in high school with testosterone running high. Tell me what boy hasn't done this in high school? Please, I would like to know.
Why would she come forward if this wasn't true? Because it has basically destroyed her family. She's had to move, she's gone undercover, she's gotten death threats. So if she's lying, why come forward?
She's also destroying his life, his wife's lives, his children's lives, his career. I mean, why didn't she come out sooner if she's telling the truth?
Why didn't she come out when he was going into the Bush White House? Why didn't she come out when he's been a federal judge for over a decade?
Why not have a thorough investigation instead of just the two of them, he said, she said?
Because it doesn't matter. It does not matter what everyone else has to say.
This is what happened, though, with Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. The FBI investigated. It took 3 days. Done. Why not now?
Well, this is not the same. This is a high school kid. I mean, it's not Anita Hill story.
Does something that allegedly happened some 30-plus years ago matter today?
You can't judge the character of a man based on what he did at 17.
And I would hate to think that 30, 40 years later, somebody's going to destroy your life because somewhere at some party, it's not right, but maybe you touch somebody the way you're not supposed to.
And who brought the alcohol for these kids?
As women, though, do you have some sympathy for her, for what she's going through?
No, I have no sympathy. And perhaps maybe at that moment she liked him, and maybe he didn't pay attention to her afterwards, and he went out with another girl, and she got bitter, or whatever the situation is. They're kids.
If it is true, would it be okay with you if he became a justice on the Supreme Court?
As long as that's an isolated incident, yes.
He was 17. He was not even an adult. And we all made mistakes at 17. I believe in a second chance.
I'd be more than okay with him being Supreme Court judge.
If the person made a mistake and they've moved on and they have been a good human being, who are we to judge?